At precisely 6:47 on an ordinary Tuesday, a neighborhood association president committed a blunder worth $2.3 million, one that earned her 8 years behind federal bars, and the whole catastrophe began with a set of bolt cutters and the wrong government vehicle. That grinding crunch of hardened steel slicing through my padlock chain shattered the pristine morning calm like a detonation. That single act transformed Bethany Kensington Wright from community board chairwoman into a convicted federal criminal in under a minute. You see, while I was stationed overseas dismantling narcotics networks, this power-drunk neighborhood queen decided my offending truck needed removal. What escaped her attention entirely? That Jeep was registered to a federal narcotics task force, packed with $347,000 in classified monitoring gear. And I happen to be the type of government agent whose specialty is dismantling criminal operations. She assumed she was hauling away some grunt's pickup. Instead, she committed offenses that would embarrass actual drug lords. What would your reaction be if some community tyrant targeted your belongings while you served abroad? Drop a flag below and share your location. Let's find out how many defenders are tuning in. My name is Marcus Tank Rodriguez, and 12 weeks ago I believed that inheriting my late grandmother's property would be a gift from heaven. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Willowbrook Estates. Imagine flawless suburban purgatory where every residence shares identical tan siding, irrigation systems click alive on timers, and freshly spread wood chips fail to disguise the overwhelming scent of privilege. Association fees ran $150 monthly for so-called community upkeep. The real translation? Funding some entitled dictator's campaign to ruin your daily existence. I serve as an Army Reserve military police officer, freshly recruited into a federal narcotics unit. Grandma Rosa's home was meant to anchor my future. Lease it during deployment. Accumulate value. Honor the remarkable woman who raised me solo after both my parents perished in an automobile accident when I turned 12. Those rooms still carry the aroma of her handmade tortillas and cinnamon. Every groaning floorboard preserves lessons she drilled into me about decency. Mijo, she would whisper, you confront those who push others around, but you always choose the honorable path. Now meet Bethany Kensington Wright. Envision a 52-year-old realtor behind the wheel of a pristine white luxury SUV who literally measures lawn height using a metal ruler. 7 consecutive years commanding the neighborhood board converted her into a residential despot. Her spouse Carl occupied a city council seat, granting her an illusion of invincibility. This individual mailed penalty notices for holiday decorations still hanging in early January. 14 days into my overseas assignment, her message invaded my inbox. Infraction alert. Unauthorized commercial vehicle on premises. My government-assigned Jeep Wrangler, openly displaying federal law enforcement insignia, apparently constituted a visual blight. Bethany's creative reading of community bylaws declared work vehicles banned from residential driveways entirely. Here is the detail she overlooked completely. That Jeep housed $200,000 in surveillance technology supporting active cartel prosecutions. GPS beacons, scrambled radio systems, hidden cameras, all federally owned assets requiring departmental clearance before any relocation. Her penalty? $50 daily, piling up relentlessly while I dodged hostile fire on foreign soil. My sister Maya, gentle elementary school educator Maya, attempted diplomacy with this residential oppressor. She drove over to clarify my deployment, presented copies of official orders, even volunteered to drape the vehicle with covering material. Regulations apply universally, Bethany barked, glaring at Maya like something beneath her designer shoes. If your brother lacks the discipline to observe basic neighborhood expectations, perhaps this community doesn't suit your family's circumstances. That conversation with Maya still reverberates through my consciousness. The fracture in her voice as she sat at Grandma's kitchen counter. Tank, she made threats about placing a lien against our home. She implied Carl has influence within the school district and supporting me could jeopardize my position. Maya uncovered the broader scheme. The Johnson household, headed by a Marine, received citations because his motorcycle produced excessive sound. Sarah Martinez, a Navy spouse whose husband was deployed, faced penalties because decorative garden statues appeared unprofessional. Every service-connected family in Willowbrook experienced targeted harassment. But here's where everything unraveled. Bethany's infractions were entirely fabricated. I instructed Maya to examine the authentic HOA covenant documents buried among grandmother's belongings, signed upon her original 1987 purchase. Government vehicles received explicit exemption. Emergency responders, armed forces, law enforcement, every category enjoyed documented protection. Bethany had manufactured fictitious regulations, gambling that residents would feel too frightened or uninformed to verify. The neighborhood existed under genuine intimidation. Residents traded hushed warnings across backyard fences but refused public opposition. Bethany engineered a culture where challenging her supremacy guaranteed becoming her subsequent victim. Carl's governmental affiliations rendered resistance seemingly pointless. When corruption wears a clipboard and khakis, ordinary families become its prisoners. That revelation clarified what I truly confronted. This wasn't about parking spaces or curb appeal. This represented coordinated persecution of military households orchestrated by a compromised governing board shielded by political connections. The gritty texture between my teeth during that overseas call with Maya. The harsh blend of engine fumes and nervous perspiration under brutal desert sun. Grandma's voice threading through my thoughts. Confront those who intimidate, but choose the honorable path. While I served my country intercepting narcotics bound for American neighborhoods. Some suburban princess believed she could seize my family's inheritance through invented penalties and scare tactics. Bethany Kensington Wright had just provoked the wrong federal operative. She imagined she was confronting some defenseless military household. What she failed to comprehend was that I specialize in unraveling criminal networks, and her neighborhood racket had just become my newest investigation. Bethany's subsequent action arrived 48 hours later, representing pure residential aggression. A certified letter landed at Maya's address demanding immediate vehicle extraction or emergency towing within 24 hours. Not the standard 48, just 24. This individual was attempting to confiscate federal assets during my overseas deployment. The correspondence, carbon copied to Carl's municipal office and local authorities, referenced emergency health hazards and urgent community deterioration. Complete fabrication, yet packaged with official letterhead and legal terminology engineered to paralyze through intimidation. Maya phoned from grandmother's kitchen, and panic saturated her words alongside the familiar creaking of aged hardwood beneath her feet. Tank, a removal truck keeps circling our block. The operator keeps examining your Jeep like he's calculating the approach. The fragrance of grandmother's scented candles couldn't overpower the fear saturating Maya's descriptions. This constituted psychological combat, neighborhood edition. That triggered my initial counteroffensive. I reached military legal counsel, judge advocate general attorneys who consumed constitutional violations as morning sustenance. Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams reviewed my documentation, and her professional composure morphed into blazing indignation. Rodriguez, this individual just threatened to seize federal law enforcement assets. That doesn't qualify as a community infraction. That constitutes a federal felony. Most civilians remain unaware of critical protections. The Servicemembers Civil Relief Act extends beyond shielding deployed personnel from contractual disputes. It explicitly forbids harassment targeting deployed service members' possessions. More critically, my Jeep wasn't personal property. It represented federal law enforcement apparatus belonging directly to the United States. Williams promptly submitted formal grievances through military command, initiating something magnificent, a federal military coordination review. Overnight, Bethany's authoritarian hobby landed beneath the scrutiny of individuals possessing genuine institutional power. But the genuine revelation emerged here, converting everything deeply personal. Maya began excavating grandmother's archived HOA records, and concealed within 2019 meeting transcripts, she discovered explosive evidence. A formal letter Bethany submitted to municipal planning authorities arguing against military housing support programs throughout Willowbrook because, and I quote, Temporary military populations undermine sustained community investment principles. Decoded plainly? She'd campaigned to exclude service families from our neighborhood for years. Delicate aged paper nearly disintegrating between Maya's fingers as she photographed every incriminating page. Her startled gasp when the full magnitude of Bethany's discrimination became visible. Tank, she's been methodically targeting every military household that relocates here. The Henderson family received citations for their teenager's bicycle being improperly stored. The Washington family got penalized for noise complaints when their newborn cried overnight. This wasn't random bureaucratic overreach. This represented systematic bigotry supported by governmental influence. Carl harbored a pending commercial arrangement. Upscale condominium construction requiring HOA authorization for zoning modifications. Military households with their functional vehicles and unpredictable deployment calendars undermined the premium community branding strategy. Maya's pedagogical instincts activated completely. She initiated contact with every victimized household, constructing a comprehensive documentation network. Each fabricated penalty, each threatening correspondence, each intimidation maneuver. She was inadvertently assembling a federal discrimination prosecution. But Bethany escalated once more, crossing boundaries that would permanently haunt her. The percussion of premium shoes striking concrete resonated through Maya's phone as Bethany performed an unauthorized property assessment of grandmother's residence. She was cataloging every element, photographing my Jeep from numerous angles, calculating distances using measuring tape. Your brother's uniformed service provides no exemption from residential compliance, she informed Maya with that patronizing inflection that makes privilege beg for correction. Perhaps your household should evaluate whether this community accommodates your particular circumstances. Encrypted language meaning we prefer you elsewhere. My counterattack landed with devastating precision. I remotely engaged the GPS monitoring and security protocols installed throughout my Jeep, standard configuration for task force operations. The recorded data proved extraordinary. Bethany had trespassed upon my property 17 separate times across 72 hours, photographing classified law enforcement technology without authorization. That transcends mere harassment. That borders on intelligence gathering against federal operations. When my task force commander, Captain Sarah Chen, learned that a residential board president was conducting reconnaissance of federal narcotics surveillance equipment and intimidating military households, her reply was refreshingly blunt. Rodriguez, how rapidly would you prefer this person's existence to become extraordinarily complicated? The federal apparatus was preparing to acquaint Bethany Kensington Wright with repercussions she never anticipated. Bethany's subsequent maneuver reeked of desperation disguised as community authority, and it nearly shattered my family entirely. 72 hours following my legal complaint, she contracted exec-safe security to enforce neighborhood compliance standards. 2 uniformed guards patrolling in a branded SUV, documenting my Jeep hourly as though monitoring an explosive threat. But the genuine crisis emerged from their neighborhood propaganda campaign. Maya called me sobbing, her voice fragmenting across satellite transmission from some remote desert installation. Tank, they're portraying you as hazardous. Claiming that military equipment in residential zones creates safety vulnerabilities. Mrs. Patterson refuses eye contact with me now. Maya's anguish intermingled with arid desert wind through my handset created something frozen and resolute within my core. These individuals were demolishing my family's standing while I remained powerless to intervene. My response demanded surgical accuracy from 8,000 miles distant. I briefed Captain Chen during my authorized communications window, explaining how contracted security was actively surveilling federal task force equipment. Her guidance proved unexpectedly strategic. Rodriguez, this requires delicacy. Heavy-handed intervention validates their narrative about dangerous equipment. We need them to incriminate themselves. The critical discovery arrived when I accessed my Jeep's onboard security remotely. Federal task force vehicles contain more monitoring capability than most precinct stations. Motion detectors, thermal imaging cameras, satellite tracking, automated photography capturing anyone approaching within 15 feet. The recorded evidence chilled me thoroughly. Bethany wasn't merely noting infractions. At 1:43 in the morning, surveillance captured her illuminating my vehicle's interior with a flashlight through the glass, photographing dashboard instrumentation, actually trying door handles. She was attempting unauthorized access to classified federal surveillance apparatus. But the truly alarming discovery? She wasn't operating independently. Footage revealed her directing security personnel toward specific technological features while they captured detailed photographs of government communications systems. Community relationships were disintegrating, and Maya absorbed every consequence. Parents at her school began questioning whether someone from a military family experiencing security complications should instruct their children. Her principal requested a discussion regarding community apprehensions. The chalky residue of institutional pressure permeated Maya's tone during our subsequent conversation. "Tank, they're dismantling my livelihood." Bethany informed the parent organization that service families introduce instability and security concerns into residential areas. "She's weaponizing my profession against me." That moment crystallized that this extended beyond my property entirely. They were systematically disassembling my family's existence while I remained unable to shield them from overseas. The sensation of powerlessness carries a flavor like powdered earth and suppressed fury, sitting inside a communications bunker surrounded by instruments of warfare while some residential extremist methodically unraveled my sister's world back stateside. Bethany's contracted guards escalated by directly confronting Maya. The senior guard, some washout with an authority obsession, blocked her path while she carried groceries to her car. "Ma'am, we require discussion regarding your brother's military operations," he stated, obstructing her vehicle access. "That equipment potentially endangers community welfare. We need details about what activities he might conduct from that residence." Maya, channeling her educator's composure, immediately began audio recording on her device. "Are you implying my brother, who serves overseas defending our nation, represents some kind of danger to American households?" She responded, voice controlled despite barely perceptible trembling. The guard advanced closer. Deliberate encroachment into personal space calculated to threaten. Service members occasionally carry problems home. Post-traumatic conditions, armaments, monitoring equipment. We're simply safeguarding neighborhood security. They were characterizing me as an unstable, potentially threatening veteran. Textbook military discrimination packaged inside community safety rhetoric. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's recording your bully while your hands still shake. But Maya's recording captured something invaluable. The guard acknowledging they were probing surveillance technology inside my vehicle. That admission became evidence supporting a federal intelligence interference case. My counteroffensive traveled channels Bethany never anticipated. Captain Chin notified ExecSafe Security's Federal Licensing Authority, informing them their personnel had conducted unauthorized reconnaissance of classified governmental equipment. The guards evaporated overnight, but their employer now confronted federal inquiry regarding unlawful intelligence operations. Bethany's reaction to losing her enforcement apparatus was undiluted desperation. She bombarded every conceivable agency with emergency grievances. Police, fire departments, building inspectors, she even contacted animal services. But she'd inadvertently generated a documentary trail cataloging her fixation with federal property. The confrontation was intensifying while I remained trapped abroad as my household endured the damage. But Bethany had absolutely no comprehension that she just activated protocols bringing comprehensive federal law enforcement authority crashing upon her residential empire. Bethany's frantic behavior peaked at 6:47 that Tuesday morning, and Maya's surveillance equipment recorded every federal offense in crystal clarity. The sound permanently embedded in my memory. 3 sharp metallic crunches as bolt cutters devoured my security chain. Each percussive snap piercing suburban dawn stillness like explosions. Maya's phone jolted me conscious inside a deployment shelter 8,000 miles distant. Her voice was pure adrenaline. "Tank, she's destroying your locks right now. She brought bolt cutters and a flatbed. She's physically taking your Jeep this moment." Through Maya's camera, I witnessed Bethany Kensington Wright accumulate federal charges in real time. hair uncombed, wearing morning robe, she'd engaged budget bills towing for cash. Zero documentation, zero verification. She was desperately directing them to load federal law enforcement equipment onto their transport vehicle. The tow operator surveyed the federal task force markings and immediately retreated like the vehicle emanated radiation. "Lady, this carries government insignia with federal identification. No payment justifies me touching this." "It's derelict property," Bethany shrieked, her composure completely fracturing, saliva escaping with every syllable. "I hold authorization as community president with jurisdiction to eliminate neighborhood violations." That declaration, documented across 3 independent security cameras, instantly transformed into prosecution exhibit number 1. My counterstrike activated immediately with devastating efficiency. I reached Captain Chin through emergency protocols, triggering response procedures specifically designed for theft involving federal law enforcement assets. Federal marshals deployed within minutes, emergency lights blazing toward my grandmother's address. But the magnificent complication emerged here. My Jeep's concealed GPS beacon and automated security protocols documented everything independently. Federal task force vehicles incorporate kill switches, location transmitters, and cameras that engage whenever unauthorized interference occurs. The instant Bethany severed my chain, she triggered an automated federal notification system that registered across Homeland Security networks spanning multiple states. Maya maintained continuous recording when Bethany committed her ultimate blunder. After the towing operator fled, rubber scorching asphalt in his desperate departure, she physically replaced the community gate locks, effectively trapping my federal vehicle behind barriers and obstructing law enforcement access. "If he demands his precious government truck returned, he can submit appropriate community paperwork," she screamed toward Maya, brandishing replacement keys like some unhinged residential commander. Wearing a uniform doesn't elevate anyone beyond neighborhood standards. The sensation of impotent fury flooded my system watching this privileged suburbanite confiscate government property while my sister stood documenting her disintegration across the connection. Here is an important detail most citizens overlook. Federal task force vehicles incorporate automated monitoring and notification systems activating during unauthorized tampering. Severing restraints or attempting relocation initiates Homeland Security protocols, satellite tracking, and federal response coordination. This isn't petty crime. It represents interference with classified government assets carrying potential terrorism classification enhancements. The practical lesson? Tampering with federal law enforcement vehicles triggers automated national security responses. This isn't simple theft. It potentially constitutes domestic terrorism. The neighborhood uprising ignited when Mrs. Patterson observed Bethany's public collapse from her living room window. This remarkable elderly woman who'd survived economic depression and mourned 2 military sons refused to witness some community association chairwoman terrorize a deployed soldier's household. She contacted every neighbor, every veteran throughout Willowbrook, every principled person who'd silently endured under Bethany's oppressive administration. By mid-morning, my grandmother's residence was encircled by protective neighbors constructing a human barrier around government property. "This concludes immediately," announced Tom Henderson, 72-year-old Vietnam veteran whose own son completed 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan. "You want access to that soldier's vehicle, you navigate through 30 American veterans standing between you and it." Maya's voice carried renewed strength when she reconnected with me, fortified by a fortress of community solidarity that tightened my throat with appreciation. "Tank, you need to witness this scene." The entire street assembled. Mr. Henderson displayed his service flag. Mrs. Chen is brewing coffee for everybody. Nobody intends to leave. But Bethany's response to collective resistance represented pure residential authoritarianism elevated to extremes. She submitted emergency reports to every governmental body imaginable. Police, claiming veterans organized armed resistance groups. Fire services, alleging combustible hazards from military technology. Building enforcement, inventing violations regarding unauthorized gatherings. Even animal control, asserting that emotional support animals constituted dangerous beasts. Every fabricated complaint constituted another federal offense. Submitting false declarations concerning military personnel and government assets carries substantial consequences under numerous federal statutes. The decisive moment arrived when federal marshals reached Willowbrook Estates and discovered Bethany had replaced community entrance locks, blocking federal officers from reaching their own stolen assets. That constitutes obstruction of federal proceedings. Marshal Jennifer Torres, a straightforward federal operative who'd apprehended cartel leaders and domestic extremists, assessed the secured gateway, and her demeanor transitioned from courteous professionalism to focused intensity. "Ma'am, you've impeded federal officers investigating theft involving government assets. Unlock this entrance immediately or face supplementary federal prosecution." Bethany's reply permanently sealed her destiny. "I reject federal jurisdiction over private association territory. Your agencies possess no authority within my community." She just challenged the constitutional authority of the United States while wearing her bathrobe. Finished. I returned to American soil 72 hours later, still carrying desert grit and surging cortisol, discovering Maya positioned at grandmother's kitchen table surrounded by sufficient evidence to prosecute an entire corrupt administration. But it was the atmosphere that registered first. Not grandmother's scented candles or warm tortillas. Rather the residue of desperation and anxiety that had permeated these walls throughout my absence. "Tank, you must review everything before prosecutors arrive," Maya stated, her fingers quivering as she organized documents across grandmother's dining surface. "I've uncovered something that fundamentally alters this entire situation." The manila envelopes contained 5 years of association financial documentation, governance transcripts, and correspondence Maya had obtained through what she described as her educator connections. But concealed within the collection lay a document that froze my circulation entirely. A binding agreement between Kensington Urban Holdings and Eastbrook Development Corporation, dated 6 months preceding my inheritance of grandmother's residence. The document heading read, "Willowbrook Estates Acquisition Blueprint Phase 2 Execution." "Tank, they weren't randomly persecuting service families," Maya murmured, her instructional analytical abilities having converted her into an inadvertent investigator. "They were deliberately vacating properties to facilitate an enormous commercial transaction." Fragile paper nearly crumbled as I absorbed the specifics. Carl's Corporation had already sold forward 47 Willowbrook properties to a national development company for premium condominium construction. Properties still belonging to other people, including grandmother's house. "Examine the priority list," Maya directed, indicating an attachment that provoked violent impulses. "Every military household, every senior citizen, every individual incapable of resisting administrative intimidation. All designated for acquisition facilitation. The Henderson family. The Martinez household. Grandmother Rosa. Every single one cataloged within a coordinated strategy to coerce below-market sales." But the discovery that transformed everything entirely arrived next. Bethany had been counterfeiting HOA violations. Maya presented the authentic 1987 community charter, the genuine document, not Bethany's altered versions. Military vehicles weren't simply permitted. They received explicit protection under federal compliance provisions. "Tank, she invented fictional regulations betting that residents would be too frightened or uninformed to investigate," Maya declared, her confidence building perceptibly. But additional revelations emerged. The association's financial ledgers exposed methodical embezzlement. Across 3 calendar years, $184,000 in resident funds had been redirected toward Carl's development enterprise through fabricated consulting agreements and fictional community enhancement projects. Here is a critical legal principle most people never encounter. When governing boards redirect community funds toward personal enterprises without member authorization, it constitutes federal mail fraud whenever communications traverse state boundaries. The racketeer-influenced and corrupt organization statute applies when criminal actions form systematic enterprise patterns affecting interstate commercial activity. The practical consequence? Association financial fraud involving numerous properties and coordinated targeting triggers federal RICO prosecution. That constitutes organized crime territory carrying 20-year sentences. The blend of Maya's nervous energy and determination saturated the kitchen as she unveiled the devastating final element. Tank, I suspect they contributed to her death. She presented violation notices dispatched to grandmother during her final weeks under hospice care. Citations for property upkeep failures and legal threats directed at a dying woman physically unable to rise from her bed. The strain of combating these fabricated penalties caused her blood pressure to spike dangerously with each delivery. Her hospice attendant reported she persistently worried whether we'd forfeit the residence. The echo of my grandmother's words resonated through memory. "Mijo, don't surrender our home." I'd attributed it to medication-induced confusion. She was actually issuing a warning. Maya's metamorphosis was finalized. No longer the intimidated educator cowering before residential despots. She'd become a crusader fortified with documentation and principled anger. Tank, this transcends your vehicle completely. This represents organized criminal activity masquerading as neighborhood governance. They've been demolishing households for financial gain. The authority structure hadn't merely shifted. It had detonated completely. Federal prosecutors were about to receive a comprehensive RICO prosecution encompassing fraud, conspiracy, civil liberties violations, and elder exploitation. But the genuine revelation was deeply personal. I wasn't defending my property any longer. I was championing my grandmother's legacy and every household they'd systematically ruined. This battle had become intensely personal in dimensions Bethany never foresaw. The command center materialized inside grandmother's living room within 48 hours, and the irony registered immediately. We were orchestrating the demolition of residential corruption inside the identical space where she once shouted at television antagonists. Maya had transformed into someone unrecognizable. The frightened instructor had vanished, replaced by a tactical coordinator liaising between federal investigators, veteran coalitions, and a battalion of furious neighbors. The scent of consequential government proceedings, overcooked coffee, tension-soaked perspiration, legal paperwork, had permanently displaced grandmother's familiar candle fragrance. Captain Chin appeared accompanied by 2 federal prosecutors carrying sufficient legal ammunition to dismantle a minor government. Assistant United States Attorney Rebecca Martinez distributed Maya's evidence across every available surface, her expression cycling through amazement. "Rodriguez, I've prosecuted cartel money laundering networks possessing less thorough documentation than this collection." That's when she articulated something that activated every lesson from my federal training. During my government crimes coursework, instructors emphasized RICO, the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organization Statute. I'd assumed its application was restricted to gangsters and narcotics syndicates. As it turns out, when residential autocrats conduct systematic fraud and discrimination crossing state lines, they qualify as federal organized crime. Maya's compiled evidence demonstrated a criminal enterprise pattern. Embezzlement, fraud, civil liberties offenses, each coordinated between Carl's municipal authority and Bethany's association control. Interstate commerce involvement through Carl's development contracts established federal jurisdiction. The allies assembling throughout grandmother's living quarters resembled a genuine resistance movement. Tom Henderson mobilized his veteran network, 12 combat survivors who'd endured actual warfare and felt zero intimidation from suburban corruption. Mrs. Patterson contributed photographic surveillance, including images capturing Bethany and Carl conducting clandestine midnight sessions inside the community building. Maya's teachers' union delivered something unexpected. Media communications expertise. Educators possess sophisticated skills communicating complex situations to ordinary families, and they'd anticipated opportunities supporting military households against organized discrimination. Maya's increasingly authoritative voice directing operations filled rooms where grandmother once softly sang traditional lullabies. Observing my younger sister commanding federal investigators and civilian volunteers caused something constricted within my chest to finally release. The financial warfare strategy resonated deeply with Maya personally. She'd invested nights analyzing association records, her analytical educator's mind recognizing patterns reminiscent of students plagiarizing across multiple assignments. The systematic theft wasn't merely financial crime. It represented betrayal of communal trust that violated her pedagogical principles fundamentally. Tank, remember when Mom balanced our family budget at this exact table? Maya noted, gesturing toward forensic accountant worksheets revealing $184,000 in misappropriated community funds. She instilled in us that robbing families represented the most despicable criminal category. Forensic accounting specialist Jennifer Walsh deconstructed Carl's methodology. Selling residences to out-of-state developers before pressuring existing owners into selling. I recognized identical advance fee fraud structures from my financial crimes curriculum. Promise prospective assets, collect payments prematurely, manipulate conditions to deliver. Maya had unearthed electronic correspondence between Carl and Eastbrook Development discussing displacement schedules for properties belonging to other people entirely. The visceral quality of that violation was physically nauseating. These individuals had strategized to steal grandmother's residence before she even passed. The covert neighborhood surveillance network merged my military expertise with community resolve. Concealed recording devices, synchronized patrols, encrypted messaging applications. Mrs. Patterson's front window evolved into monitoring headquarters. Tom Henderson's garage sheltered equipment storage, while Maya's residence served as communications center. The recall election approach originated from Maya's civic education background. She'd perpetually taught students that democratic systems only function when citizens actively participate. Now she was demonstrating that principle firsthand. Most residents remain unaware that association governing boards face recall through homeowner petitions, generally requiring 25 to 33% of members to trigger special elections. Maya's neighborhood canvassing exposed the comprehensive scope of Bethany's oppression. The Washington family possessed documentation of racially motivated harassment. The Johnson household maintained records of veteran discrimination. The elderly Kowalski couple had received citations for excessive medical equipment sound emanating from their oxygen concentrator. Within 72 hours, Maya gathered endorsements from 67% of Willowbrook residents demanding immediate board dissolution. The fragrance of approaching triumph blended with desert residue still embedded in my service uniform. Media strategy utilized Maya's educational network connections. Military family persecution narratives spread explosively through veteran online communities, attracting congressional scrutiny. 3 elected representatives formally requested federal briefings regarding systematic association discrimination. The insurance fraud revelation emerged from pure investigative instinct. Maya identified claims Bethany had submitted for property destruction allegedly caused by my Jeep. Damage that existed nowhere outside imagination. From my task force background, I recognized that insurance fraud consistently ranked as federal prosecutors' preferred charge because proof requirements are straightforward and penalties are severe. Civil rights legal specialists joined our alliance after examining discrimination documentation. Systematic persecution of military households violated federal fair housing legislation. Elder exploitation targeting grandmother triggered supplementary federal safeguards carrying millions in potential damages. Maya's election as temporary association president occurred through unanimous acclaim during an emergency residence assembly. Her inaugural action was freezing every account pending federal examination. Witnessing her accept the ceremonial gavel inside the identical community hall where Bethany had terrorized families for years represented justice delivered deliberately and precisely. The implications had expanded far beyond personal retribution. This prosecution was evolving into a national template for addressing association corruption, defending military households, and demonstrating that mobilized communities could overcome organized criminal enterprise. But Bethany and Carl remained completely oblivious that the investigative perimeter was tightening around them inexorably. Bethany's desperation crossed definitively into criminal territory at 3:17 in the morning when Maya's thermal cameras captured her crouching behind our backyard storage structure, feverishly incinerating association financial records. The caustic stench of smoldering paper and accelerant seeped through Maya's bedroom window, mingling with the anxiety that seemed to permanently surround Bethany now. She was hunched over a metal container like some suburban sorceress feeding documentation to flames with violently trembling hands. Tank, she's destroying evidence on our property, Maya breathed into her phone, watching through her window as Bethany struggled with ignition sources in the darkness. She's literally burning financial documents while facing federal investigation. My calculated patience had been accumulating for weeks. Federal monitoring teams documented every panicked action, every crime committed through desperation. But witnessing this privileged residential princess incinerate evidence of her own corruption, that represented pure dramatic irony. But Bethany's vandalism escalated beyond property destruction into personal attacks that triggered my task force protective instincts. Maya discovered her automobile desecrated the following morning. All 4 tires punctured. Hostile slurs referencing military service spray-painted across the windshield in bleeding crimson letters. Shattered glass grinding beneath Maya's footsteps as she surveyed the destruction activated something calculated and frigid within me. The experience of helpless fury felt disturbingly familiar from deployment. Watching adversaries assault people you cannot shield. But this wasn't some distant combat zone. This was domestic terrorism directed against my family. My countermeasure delivered professional satisfaction. I contacted Captain Chen, who placed one telephone call that transformed the situation entirely. Federal protective surveillance was assigned covering Maya and other witness households. Not conspicuous security details, but operatives who blended seamlessly into morning exercise routines and casual neighborhood activities. Bethany's observation campaign was now being observed by professionals possessing security clearances and arrest authority. The community mobilization was magnificent. Tom Henderson coordinated veteran patrol schedules that rendered Bethany's nocturnal incursions impossible. The rhythmic cadence of military footwear on sidewalks during pre-dawn hours became the neighborhood's new ambient soundtrack. Mrs. Patterson's kitchen transformed into coordination headquarters, organizing protection rotations over freshly baked goods and principled determination. But Carl's frantic behavior exposed corruption penetrating far deeper than anyone imagined. Maya located municipal council recordings where Carl had pressured the police chief to disregard complaints from military households. His condescending voice resonating through Maya's computer screen activated my federal training recall with startling clarity. During academy instruction, they'd emphasized conspiracy prosecution. When elected officials exploit governmental positions to systematically violate citizens' constitutional rights, it triggers federal civil rights conspiracy charges. Carl wasn't merely facilitating Bethany's behavior. He was deploying governmental authority to enable discrimination. These military types introduced disruption. Carl's recorded voice dripped with condescension. Their vehicles, their schedules, their complications depreciate property values and diminish community character. That recording instantaneously became the primary exhibit supporting federal conspiracy prosecution. Bethany's bribery attempt was captured through federal electronic surveillance. She intercepted Maya outside the supermarket, an envelope conspicuously stuffed with currency, her expensive fragrance failing to disguise the overwhelming reek of desperation. "This represents $50,000 intended for your household," Bethany stated, hands vibrating as she extended the package toward Maya. "Military families deserve superior neighborhoods regardless. Accept this amount. Locate somewhere more appropriate for your particular lifestyle." Maya, channeling her composed educator's temperament, maintained phone recording while federal operatives monitored from unmarked vehicles nearby. From my federal prosecution coursework, I understood that attempted witness bribery carries mandatory 5-year minimum sentences. But Bethany hadn't finished accumulating federal charges. She actually attempted bribing federal investigators. Through some private detective she'd retained using embezzled association money, Bethany offered government agents payment to resolve this military complication discreetly. The breathtaking audacity of her ignorance was almost refreshing. She believed federal operatives could be purchased as easily as her suburban authority. Federal investigators don't simply decline bribes. They meticulously record, document, and append them to prosecution files guaranteeing decades behind bars. Carl's political supporters abandoned him like passengers fleeing a capsizing vessel. The mayor publicly withdrew support. Fellow council members demanded his immediate resignation. His development corporation's valuation collapsed when corruption revelations reached statewide news outlets. Expensive tailoring couldn't conceal Carl's visible deterioration during emergency municipal sessions. He attempted leveraging city resources to undermine federal investigations, claiming radical military activists were targeting prosperous local enterprises. Every governmental abuse was being cataloged by federal specialists who focus exclusively on political corruption cases. Maya began receiving anonymous threats. Typed messages beneath her windshield wipers. Electronically distorted voicemails cautioning that unfortunate incidents befall educators who fail to manage their curiosity. The fracturing quality in Maya's voice during those menacing communications awakened something primal and fiercely protective inside me. But my response embodied precise federal methodology. Threatening witnesses participating in federal investigations activates FBI domestic threat assessment units. Every anonymous communication was being traced through telecommunications records, penmanship forensics, and digital investigation techniques surpassing anything depicted in fictional crime dramas. Bethany's ultimate desperate measure involved filing fraudulent police reports alleging Maya suffered mental instability and was orchestrating violent retaliation targeting community leaders. She actually informed police that military households were assembling armed resistance within Willowbrook. Fabricating reports concerning federal witnesses during active investigations transcends local criminal jurisdiction. It constitutes federal obstruction carrying terrorism enhancement provisions. The elegance of institutional patience manifested in watching Bethany systematically destroy herself one criminal act after another while methodical investigators constructed cases ensuring she'd never terrorize another family again. Bethany's concluding desperate strategy was a comprehensive media assault revealing the true extent of her suburban criminal infrastructure. The offensive targeted Maya's school initially. Anonymous grievances flooded district administrators claiming she was indoctrinating students with radical military ideology and manufacturing hazardous conditions for non-military families. Maya's fractured voice during her emergency telephone call compressed my hands into tight fists. "Tank, they're working to annihilate my professional life," she whispered from her vacant classroom, the familiar essence of learning materials and childhood innocence now corrupted by dread. "Parents are petitioning for my termination. Administration summoned me for crisis discussions regarding my connections with problematic military elements." That's when I identified Bethany had contracted Morrison and Associates, the identical reputation management firm that rehabilitates politicians following corruption exposures. They were characterizing me as a hazardous veteran experiencing psychological trauma who imported military-grade dangers into tranquil residential neighborhoods. The consistency of manufactured falsehoods differed significantly from hostile propaganda encountered overseas. This constituted intimate warfare engineered to obliterate families rather than merely missions. My patient groundwork spanning months was reaching culmination, and Maya's documentation capabilities had surpassed anything witnessed throughout my federal career. She'd been preserving every threat, every fabrication, every synchronized assault targeting our family's reputation. But the propaganda offensive exposed something that triggered my task force training at maximum intensity. Bethany hadn't operated in isolation. She'd coordinated with governing boards across 3 different states developing standardized procedures for addressing military family disruptions within residential communities. This wasn't isolated persecution. This represented organized discrimination being distributed nationally. From my federal civil rights education, I recognized that conspiracy prosecutions crossing state boundaries trigger RICO applications. When organizations coordinate systematic constitutional rights violations against citizens, it becomes organized criminal enterprise. Maya's devastating counterstrike was exquisitely effective. Her students and their families organized a solidarity demonstration that overwhelmed the school parking area with national flags and placards declaring "We champion Teacher Maya," and "Service families safeguard our liberty." The sound of 8-year-olds chanting gratitude for Mr. Tank's sister reverberated across the playground where Maya had invested years cultivating young intellects. These children comprehended justice more clearly than entitled adults ever could. But Bethany's desperation achieved criminal lunacy when she employed private investigators to surveil Maya's entire daily existence. They shadowed her commute, photographed her student interactions, documented her grocery purchases, even monitored her early morning exercise routine. The mechanical clicking of telephoto lenses outside classroom windows activated something ancient and defensively ferocious within my being. Maya identified electronic listening devices concealed inside her automobile during a scheduled safety evaluation. 3 distinct surveillance instruments, every one traceable to Morrison and Associates through federal procurement databases. The beauty of federal statute is its unambiguous treatment of unauthorized electronic monitoring. Throughout my task force education, instructors repeatedly emphasized that illegal surveillance equipment triggers Wiretap Act prosecution carrying 20-year federal sentences when combined with witness intimidation. But installing devices within vehicles enters Homeland Security jurisdiction carrying terrorism enhancement classifications. Captain Chin responded with swift federal devastation. The FBI's Counterintelligence Division assumed responsibility for Maya's case, categorizing her surveillance as potential domestic extremism. Instantly, Bethany's neighborhood harassment was being scrutinized by professionals who pursue international criminals professionally. The media eruption achieved national proportions when military advocacy organizations discovered Maya's experience. Congressional leaders began demanding explanations regarding systematic association discrimination targeting service households. The aroma of nationwide attention functioned like accelerant poured onto Bethany's meticulously maintained suburban persona. Major television networks contacted Maya. National print media pursued interviews. Military publications featured residential warfare targeting service families as front-page coverage. Carl's political career expired publicly during a live broadcast council session. Federal investigators served search documentation while cameras captured everything, carrying evidence containers as Carl sat immobilized in his governmental chair. The visible texture of complete mortification transformed his features as consequences materialized. But Morrison and Associates committed the catastrophic miscalculation triggering federal hate crime proceedings. They circulated a residential safety analysis claiming military households elevated criminal activity rates, domestic violence statistics, and substance dependency within suburban neighborhoods. Manufactured data, falsified veteran crime statistics, intentional misinformation engineered to provoke discrimination against constitutionally protected populations. Maya was studying their report when I witnessed her educator's sensibility transform into blazing righteousness. Tank, they've just maligned every military family nationwide using fabricated data designed to turn communities against veterans. Distributing false information intended to incite discrimination against military families violates federal hate crime provisions. When coordinated commercially across multiple states, it becomes racketeering with civil rights conspiracy enhancements. The federal inquiry expanded across 17 states as additional military households emerged sharing parallel harassment experiences. Maya's documentation methodology became the standard template for federal prosecutors constructing RICO cases against corrupted association networks nationwide. Maya received support correspondence from military spouses coast to coast, sharing accounts of manufactured violations, coordinated intimidation, and systematic campaigns forcing service families from their suburban residences. Maya's increasingly commanding voice coordinating alongside federal attorneys filled spaces where grandmother once shared stories about confronting those who abuse power. My younger sister had evolved from casualty to nationally recognized champion for military family protections. They assumed they were confronting one educator and one soldier, Maya declared, surrounded by federal prosecution files documenting nationwide discrimination patterns. They were actually waging war against every American household that serves this nation. The public accounting was imminent, and it would be federally magnificent. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never experienced anything comparable. Filled beyond maximum occupancy with federal investigators positioned along every wall, broadcast cameras from 6 outlets, and military families spanning 3 states who traveled hours to witness residential justice delivered. The atmosphere of principled fury blended with lukewarm coffee and the electric anticipation of federal law enforcement preparing to illustrate why interfering with government assets carries permanent consequences. Congressional delegates occupied front-row positions, documenting observations for forthcoming legislative hearings addressing military family discrimination. Bethany arrived characteristically tardy in her luxury vehicle, approaching through a corridor of demonstrators brandishing signs reading "Military families deserve justice" and "Prosecute association criminals." The sound of her premium footwear striking pavement was completely overwhelmed by veterans rhythmically chanting expressions of gratitude directed specifically toward Maya. She entered projecting the demeanor of a deposed ruler staging a final dramatic appearance. Carl trailing behind, exhibiting the defeated posture of someone confronting federal incarceration. Undisguised terror radiated from both as they faced a chamber packed with families they'd methodically victimized. Maya approached the lectern first. No longer the terrorized instructor being persecuted by residential autocrats, she'd evolved into something formidable, a nationally recognized advocate whose voice now carried the weight of federal support and congressional engagement. For 5 years, these individuals exploited their positions to conduct warfare against military households, Maya commenced, her words amplified through speakers broadcasting simultaneously across social media platforms. They manufactured regulations, misappropriated funds, and orchestrated discrimination campaigns violating every fundamental principle this nation represents. Thunderous response rolled through the community hall as the audience erupted into applause, rattling the window frames. Federal prosecutor Rebecca Martinez stepped forward carrying evidence containers representing months investigating what she categorized as organized residential crime. Her voice conveyed the gravity of federal authority that compels criminals to recognize their amateur operation has concluded. The United States government has assembled comprehensive evidence documenting criminal conspiracy involving federal property theft, civil liberties violations, witness coercion, embezzlement, and obstruction of judicial proceedings, she declared. Each charge landing with the precision of a judicial wrecking ball. Tom Henderson represented the veteran community, his weathered voice trembling with contained emotion. My son completed 3 combat rotations defending this nation's liberty. These individuals believed they could desecrate that sacrifice for personal enrichment. Today they discover their profound miscalculation. But the defining moment was mine to deliver. I approached the podium sensing grandmother's spirit, her words resonating through memory. Confront bullies, mijo, but always choose the honorable path. This was precisely that path. Bethany Kensington Wright believed she was cutting restraints on some soldiers' personal transportation, I stated, my voice penetrating complete silence. What she genuinely accomplished was compromising an active federal narcotics operation, endangering classified surveillance technology, and confiscating property belonging directly to the United States government. The unified gas that consumed the room resembled atmosphere being evaluated from the structure entirely. That vehicle contained monitoring technology valued at $347,000 supporting ongoing cartel prosecutions spanning 4 states. When she severed those chains at dawn, she didn't merely commit larceny. She jeopardized national security operations, keeping narcotics away from American communities and protecting American households. Bethany's complexion transformed to the shade of deteriorating concrete as the authentic magnitude of her federal recklessness crystallized before her. She'd graduated from neighborhood aggressor to someone who'd compromised national security operations. But her genuine offense wasn't confiscating my vehicle, I continued, feeling accumulated fury transmuting into something measured and juridical. Her authentic crime was conducting systematic warfare against military households, exploiting governmental corruption to plunder from the community that trusted her, and assuming that residential entitlement superseded federal law. The audience detonated into a standing ovation. Demands for imprisonment merging with declarations honoring service families. As federal investigators advanced toward their subjects with practiced coordination, Federal Marshal Jennifer Torres moved with rehearsed precision, reflecting years of apprehending individuals who considered themselves untouchable. Bethany Kensington Wright, you're being placed under arrest for theft involving federal law enforcement assets. Conspiracy violating civil rights, misappropriation of community funds, witness coercion, and obstruction of federal proceedings. The metallic sound of restraints engaging echoed through amplification systems as cameras preserved the instant residential tyranny encountered federal accountability. Bethany's expression transitioned from stubborn resistance toward the emerging recognition that her suburban kingdom offered zero protection from federal correctional facilities. Carl attempted escaping through the rear doorway with the cowardice that defined his character consistently, but collided directly with federal operatives who'd predicted precisely that maneuver. His apprehension lacked dramatic flair but delivered equivalent satisfaction, observing corruption confronting accountability in real time. The federal protection governing military and law enforcement assets had provided brutally instructive education. These aren't ordinary vehicles. They're classified governmental resources protected by statutes imposing mandatory minimum sentences. When residential extremists compromise federal operations, they discover local corruption intersects federal consequences with mathematical inevitability. Maya was interviewed live across national broadcast networks. Her evolution from persecuted educator to military family champion inspiring direct congressional action. This demonstrates that coordinated persecution of military households constitutes federal crime, she declared to cameras reaching millions of viewers. No governing board, regardless of corruption level, supersedes the United States Constitution. The flavor of triumph surpassed every cherished memory of grandmother's kitchen, enhanced by the satisfaction of witnessing aggressors discover that federal law refuses negotiation or compromise. 18 months following sentencing, I stood inside grandmother's kitchen reviewing the conclusive judicial report, and I could practically hear her voice saying justice delivered properly, mijo. Bethany received 8 years federal imprisonment without possibility of parole, supplemented by $647,000 in restorative payments to affected households. The presiding judge's declaration achieved legendary recognition within legal academia. Your calculated persecution of military households constitutes domestic extremism disguised as residential administration. This tribunal refuses to tolerate suburban authoritarianism. Carl received 6 years imprisonment plus lifetime prohibition from governmental positions. His development empire disintegrated entirely with $2.3 million distributed through community settlements, ensuring every victimized household received compensation for years of systematic suffering. But the authentic triumph manifested watching our neighborhood transform from a geography of intimidation into a community safeguarding its membership. Maya revolutionized association governance as democratically chosen president, establishing bylaws that became the nationwide standard for military family protection. The fragrance of renewed optimism replaced stagnant corruption as she introduced the Willowbrook Military Family Bill of Rights, federal safeguards codified into community regulation. The Veterans Memorial Park occupies the location where Bethany's residence formerly stood, seized through federal asset forfeiture proceedings and repurposed through community referendum. Children now swing on playground equipment where residential oppression previously flourished. Their joyful sounds carry across grass that grows naturally without ruler-based measurements. The Rodriguez Foundation for Military Family Rights became Maya's true calling. She departed education to assist families nationally combating association discrimination, utilizing our prosecution as the foundational template for federal civil rights enforcement. Her documentation approaches are now integrated into FBI Training Academy curriculum. Grandmother's house evolved into operational headquarters for military family advocacy. The kitchen where she instructed us about confronting oppressors now hosts strategic planning sessions with congressional staff, constitutional attorneys, and families waging their own residential battles. The tangible outcomes exceeded every aspiration. Congressional legislation now mandates association financial transparency while shielding military families from organized persecution. The Tank Rodriguez Act establishes federal oversight regarding community governance with criminal penalties for discrimination targeting service members. Essential knowledge most Americans never acquire became our contribution to the national conversation. Military personnel possess constitutional protections superseding local ordinances. Association governing boards face recall through resident petitions requiring merely 25% of homeowners. Federal law classifies systematic discrimination as organized crime punishable by decades of imprisonment. The practical lesson? Military families possess federal protections that no association can override, and communities wield the power to remove corrupted boards when they mobilize collectively. The National HOA Corruption Database has cataloged over 400 comparable cases since our experience gained national attention, triggering federal inquiries protecting thousands of military households from residential extremism. Property values throughout Willowbrook appreciated 31% following corruption elimination, demonstrating that justice generates prosperity and principled governance attracts quality residents. Military families now deliberately seek our community, confident they'll be welcomed and celebrated. Maya's transformation into a nationally recognized advocate brought unanticipated happiness. She married Captain Sarah Chen's brother David, a Navy veteran who relocated to Willowbrook specifically because our story proved military families could prevail against institutional corruption. Their wedding reception filled the community center where we'd witnessed federal accountability delivered live. I discovered my own fulfillment with Elena Martinez, the federal prosecutor who'd helped construct our case foundation. She transferred to regional operations, and we purchased the residence adjacent to grandmother's property. Awakening each morning within the neighborhood we fought to preserve delivers the sensation of victory experienced daily. The Rodriguez Military Scholarship Fund, established from litigation settlements, has funded 23 military children through university education. Each graduation ceremony reinforces that one household's determination can reshape entire communities and generate opportunities for subsequent generations. Mrs. Patterson, now 91 years young and still serving as the neighborhood's moral compass, ceremonially opens every community celebration. Your grandmother understood you'd accomplish something remarkable, she confides during park dedications, her eyes gleaming with contentment. She simply didn't anticipate you'd rescue the entire neighborhood. The singular moment validating everything occurred during our inaugural Freedom Day Festival. Hundreds of military households gathered within the park occupying the space where Bethany's authoritarian reign once existed, exchanging narratives of triumph over residential corruption. The melody of children's laughter interweaving with veteran pride. The aroma of outdoor cooking and liberty-saturating atmosphere previously contaminated by intimidation. The sensation of Maya's fingers interlaced with mine as we observed families gathering safely within the community grandmother cherished. But my preferred moment recurs every sunrise when I observe our national banner flying above residences where military families exist without harassment or discrimination. This is precisely what triumph tastes like. Justice realized, community restored, and the certainty that aggressors face defeat when principled people organize and resist together. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and join us here on Winds of Thought for more accounts of everyday people standing against corruption. Share your own residential nightmare in the comments below. The Rodriguez Foundation offers complimentary legal guidance to military families confronting neighborhood discrimination.